welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to be chatting to you today. In the episode today, I wanted to touch on something that I go through regularly myself, and that is the question, when is the right time to expand your business? So you might find that business is booming, you're fully booked, you just can't keep up with designs and your customers, you're getting amazing reviews, and you're starting to think, is it time to maybe get a larger studio? Is it time to possibly move into a retail space? Or is it time to take on your first employee? Now, before you rush into that, there are a couple of steps that I would recommend that you do, because you do not want to rush in too soon and, maybe sign that lease or get that employee on board to find out that you actually weren't ready. So the things I wanted to run through today, I want to give you an idea of how to do some calculations just to make sure that your business is at a good financial state to take on those extra expenses. And also just a few tips to think about to just make sure you've got everything in line before you rush out and do something that you may not actually be ready for. It's a common feeling, and we all get there, that you're maxed out or you feel maxed out. You maybe on one hand, you've got, people saying they love your product. You feel that you're turning away orders because maybe you just can't physically do them, or maybe you don't have the space to actually do them. So it makes sense that you would think, well, the next step for me is going to be maybe a bigger retail space, or maybe an employee that's going to help me in this business because it's so big. However, just expanding on that alone, so that momentum that you feel, without sitting down and doing some real rock solid research and plans, can be a massive gamble. Before we even glance at a rental listing, we need to look at the business as it is right now. Expansion will just amplify any problems or issues that you have in your business. So you need to make sure it is running as efficiently and as profitably as possible before trying to expand, because it's just going to make the problem bigger and it can really get you into trouble. So the first thing I want you to think about before you jump in and expand, take on that lease, take on that employee, are you consistently profitable? And I don't just mean that you had one fantastic month. It means, are you consistently 6 to 8 months out of the year getting good, predictable income where you're paying yourself and you're paying your bills and you still have money left over? So that leftover cash is your net profit, and that's what's going to fuel your expansion. So on top of that, you also need a bit of a cash buffer. Maybe you need to have about 6 months of operating expenses saved up, sitting in the bank before you even think of adding on any new. They really aren't optional. Having that cash reserve is how you're going to survive when you do step up, take on those extra expenses of an employee or maybe a lease. Second, is the demand for your product truly sustainable? So are you consistently turning away the right kinds of clients or the right kind of work? Turning away low profit jobs is just smart business. But if you're regularly saying no to maybe high value weddings or big corporate clients or the most profitable arrangements simply because you cannot handle the volume, that's a green light that growth might be the right time for you. So some industry statistics say that about 40% of startups fail because there just isn't a real market need for what they offer. So you need to be completely certain that there is a demand for your product that will help you reach those higher revenue goals that you're going to need to support the additional expenses of expansion. Third, are your systems documented? Now, I know that everyone wants to skip this. I myself am really, really bad at documenting systems. However, it's non-negotiable if you're thinking of taking on staff. Can you hand someone, a new employee, something that tells them exactly what needs to be done within your business? Things from, maybe how to process orders, condition flowers, to, how do you create that signature bouquet? How do you handle customer complaints? How do you even do the correct costing formula and product menus? All of those things that might be in your head as a business owner, you really need to get that down on some paper so that any new employees that come along are able to know exactly what to do, and it will make it so much easier for them to step into the role. So documenting your processes is the only way that you can really delegate to a staff member successfully. Without it, you can't really train them effectively, and you'll just become the bottleneck. So your new employee will have to come to you for advice on basically everything or to approve everything, and you're not really getting the most out of your employee, and it sort of defeats the purpose of even having someone there to help you. If you can't say confidently yes to those 3 points, then you're probably not quite ready to take that next step. So hit pause, focus on strengthening the business that you have right now. But if you did say yes, then let's have a look at the next step on how you can evaluate if you're really ready to take on those extra expenses and start expanding your business. Now for some maths. Yay. All right, so the real maths on a new lease. Before you start thinking about moving into that perfect little shop in the perfect street and you have this beautiful vision of what it's going to look like, the displays, all of that stuff, I want you to sit down and put it all onto a spreadsheet. So the biggest mistake business owners make when expanding is underestimating the true cost of taking on a lease. So let's talk the rent. Say you get this great spot for $500 a week. That's $2,000 a month. Sounds doable, right? But then you need to think bigger. Annually, that's $26,000. Now, here's the most important rule for a florist. To justify that new expense of $26,000 a year and to make sure you can cover that new expense of $26,000 a year, you need to generate at least 3 times that amount to cover that cost. Why 3? Well, I'm just working on the basic florist markup and doing the maths. So the industry standard is by 3. Roughly 1/3 is going to cover the cost of your goods. The second third is going to cover your time to do it as the employee or as the owner of the shop. And the third, that's actually to cover the rent. So that $26,000, you're now going to have to turn over an additional $78,000 a year just to pay your rent. That's also on top of all of the income that you're already making. So if that number makes you a little scared, good, because it should. You really need to do the hard maths and find out if you can financially take on that lease. But now rent is just the beginning. So you also have to budget in things like your hidden costs. So the fit out. What is it going to cost to get the space ready? Painting, flooring, shelving, workbenches. Maybe you're going to need a cold room or flower fridges. That can easily run into thousands and thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, depending on how you want to set it up. There's also things like your electricity and insurance. So your power bill is most likely going to be more in a bigger space. Also thinking if you're bringing in a large walk-in cold room, it's going to use a lot more power. Insurance is probably going to be more when you move into a retail space or a larger space. It is your responsibility as the business owner to cover everything within that business, including, the liability. You're taking on more customers in a retail space. So the chances are that the liability part of your insurance is going to be more than if you were in a home studio where you're not actually face-to-face with the general public. Also things like signage. So how do people find you if you don't have amazing signage out the front on your shop? Professional signage can again also cost hundreds of dollars through to several thousands of dollars, depending on how you want to do it. There's also legal fees. Please never, ever enter into any sort of commercial lease agreement without consulting a solicitor, because they are quite technical documents. Someone who has been a tenant and also owned a commercial building and then having to produce leases, I can tell you it is crazy. There are all sorts of rules. There's also things that building owners can put in, additional costs, things called outgoings, which can be regular maintenance. It can be, maybe air conditioning repairs or air conditioning maintenance. Lots of things can be snuck into a commercial lease. And it's really important that you seek really good legal advice before you sign anything, because you might find you're signing something that runs for 3, 5, possibly even 10 years. And once you've signed it, you cannot legally get out of it. So you have to pay that money for the duration that you've signed. So you really do need to pay whatever. Again, that could be hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars to talk to a solicitor before you sign a lease. Right. If that hasn't scared you off, now let's look at what the true cost would be for your first hire. So you might think a lease is expensive. Let's talk about hiring an employee. Typically, that's probably going to be even more expensive than signing that lease agreement. But before we do that, what I'd like you to think about is actually what will that employee do? Is it going to be admin related? Is it customer service related? Do you need a floral designer? Really be clear on what you need the employee to do first, what tasks it is that you can't do yourself, or what tasks is it that you need assistance with, and have a very clear idea of what sort of employee you need. And that's going to help determine what you have to pay them. Now, something I see far too often with business owners is they have no bloody idea what to pay people. Now, in the majority of states in Australia, you have to abide by, is that the right word? The General Retail Industry Award. That tells you exactly the hourly rate that you must pay an employee. You can't just make that shit up. It is a legal requirement within your business. So once you've decided what they're going to be doing, head over to the General Retail Industry Award. Now, if you're in the couple of states that don't apply to that, you really need to figure that out. I think there's a couple of businesses that run within Western Australia that don't fall under that. I'm not sure about South Australia. Just suss that out if you're in one of those states, just to make sure you know what agreement your employees would fall under. Have a look at it. Yes, it is a full-on document. You can also reach out to your state industry associations. You can ask them questions and get the information. Before you hire anyone, know exactly what it's going to cost. All right. So once you've worked out their rate, I haven't honestly looked at it. I meant to do that. I think a retail florist is somewhere in the order of $30 an hour, maybe just under that for permanent, just over that for casual. That's another thing you need to suss out in the award. You can't just put on a casual thinking that's going to work. If they're going to be doing regular hours on the same days, same hours, they need to be employed as a permanent or a part-time employee. Again, you can't just make that shit up. It tells you in the document. Once you've got the rate, it's going to cost you more than, let's say, $30 an hour for that employee. You have to add on the super guarantee, which is currently 12%. You can tell I haven't got an employee at the moment. That's on top of the hourly rate. You also need to add on workers' compensation. So if you take on an employee, you must have some sort of workers' compensation insurance. Now that is different in every state, and the amount that costs depends on how many hours the person's doing, what sort of job they're doing, and all of that. So it can range from hundreds of dollars to up, I think, over like $1,000, maybe thousands of dollars if you've got a few employees. Something else that is in the General Industry Retail Award, or whatever award it is that you're under. If you have permanent employees, whether they're permanent part-time or full-time, they're entitled to leave loading when they go on leave. So under the award, I believe it's still 4 weeks annual leave. When they go on that leave, you have to pay them a percentage more for the leave. I can't really remember what that is, but it is quite a substantial percentage on top of their normal weekly or hourly rate. So you need to factor in leave loading. You also need to factor in things like sick days. Employees are entitled to sick days, which are paid for. They're entitled to paid public holidays if they're in a full-time or part-time permanent employee. There's also things such as allowances, like uniform allowances. They need to be paid a little extra if they're required to wear a uniform. And, that's to cover things like laundering and stuff like that. Also things like meal breaks. There's all sorts of things in the award that will generally add up on top of that hourly rate. So you have to really factor that in. Something else that you need to think about is how long is it going to take to train that employee? They're really not actually going to be providing you any value until they are fully trained and competent. So you need to be able to cover that time, whether it's going to be, 2 weeks, 2 months, hopefully not too long. But that does come back onto you. And like we mentioned before, what have you documented all your systems and processes to help train up that employee to take on that role and to be as effective as possible, as quickly as possible. So let's say, if that employee is going to cost you, say $52,000 a year, it's all going to add up a lot more. It can quite easily be, say, $65,000 a year when you add on all of those extra bits and pieces. So again, let's go back to that calculation that we did before with the rent and just simply multiplying it out by 3. That employee, we'll say $70,000 a year, you now need to turn over an additional $210,000 a year in new revenue to cover that employee. Again, why have I used thirds? A third product, a third for the employee, and the other third is covering all those other things that you still have to pay, your overheads and all your bills. It doesn't even have profit really allowed for in there. So that would be the minimum, I'd say, that you need to multiply whatever the amount that employee you think is going to cost you, factor it out by 3, and then you need to be very sure that you can increase your revenue by that amount. Right. If your head hasn't exploded already by all of that maths, and if you're still with me, please, I hope you're still with me, something else that you would need to calculate is your break-even point. So you've got all of these new expenses, whether it's just the lease, just the employee, or maybe you're going the whole shebang and you're doing both. You need to work out what your new break-even point is. What is your break-even point? This is how much product do you need to sell to cover all of these new expenses in your business. It's basically a sales target that you have to hit just to cover your costs. Anything below that, you're losing money. Anything above that is great because it means you're making a profit. So the first things we need to do is, again, some more maths. You need to work out your fixed costs, and you also need to work out what your contribution margin is. What does that mean? So your fixed costs, that is adding up every expense that you have to pay each month, no matter what it is. That can include your fixed costs, so your salary, your wages, your insurance, your website, your rent, plus any new fixed costs. Maybe you're got to add on that extra employee, all of the things that you're going to have to pay in this new version of your business. What is it? Everything and anything that you can think of. That is then going to be your new magic number for your fixed costs. Okay, then next, what you need to do is to work out your contribution margin. To find it, take your average sale price and subtract the variable costs or the costs of goods from that sale. So that's most likely just going to be the wholesale cost of your flowers and your sundries. So for example, if your average sale is $100 and it's a $100 bouquet, so then you say out of that $100, $35 of that is my cost of goods. So that's the flowers, the wrapping, the bow, all of that stuff. So the actual stuff it costs you in product to make that order. That means your contribution margin is going to be $65. So that $65 is the money you have left over from that order that's going to pay for everything else in your business. Now, you just divide, say, your new fixed costs, let's just say $12,000 a month, and your average contribution margin, which is $65 per sale. So the maths, $12,000 divided by $65 equals 185 sales you have to make just to cover your bills. That means you need to make 185 sales every single month just to keep the lights on. That's your new reality. So before you expand, you need to look at this number and ask yourself with brutal honesty, can I really do that? The simple maths gives you concrete goals and removes all the guesswork. It may seem like I've just poured a big bucket of ice cold water all over your dreams of expansion, but I really want you to go into any plans of expansion with a very real understanding of what that expansion can cost you, as in money-wise, not just stress. That's why it's so important for you to sit down and work out these numbers before you start. Obviously, growth in our business is fun, it's exciting, but profitable growth is obviously the goal. Doing this homework now before you sign that lease or take on that new employee is an absolute must as a business owner to ensure that you move forward, your business remains a success, you remain in control, and you still love what you're doing as you slowly expand and become bigger and bigger within your business. It's how you ensure that when you do finally take that leap, you're not just building a bigger business, you're building a better, a stronger, and a more profitable one. So there. Sorry, it was a bit heavy, and I hope that you guys got something out of it. I didn't confuse you too much. If you want help taking it back a few steps and ensuring that your costing model is correct, head over and check out episode 10 of the podcast, where we actually talk about pricing 101 and run through a few different scenarios and also help you set up the right pricing model for your business. Also, if you're going through these numbers and maybe you're a little short on what you think you can generate, check out episode 11, where we talk about 5 different revenue ideas to try within your florist shop. Maybe there's something there that will, spark an idea that you might be able to incorporate to help boost the revenue within your shop. So, a few ideas. Now, this is our last podcast episode for 2025, and I want to say a huge thank you to everyone that has supported us this year, our first year. Yay. I know I have been a little erratic, and that is definitely something I hope to improve on next year. Given that, next year I hope to start up again in February, and so keep an eye out for that. Very exciting. I hope you all have the most amazing Christmas and New Year. However you celebrate this period, I will be pretty much shutting everything off for a few weeks and just hanging out with the family, which is, really, really cool. So thank you again for all your support. Remember, if you like what we're talking about, share it with your friends. Please hit subscribe on whatever service you watch us on, whether that's Spotify, Apple, YouTube. That would just help other people to find us, and I would really, really appreciate it. And yeah, that's it. Thank you, Flowery folk, for an awesome year, and I am super excited to be chatting to you again sometime next year.